Today, we are going to challenge pretty much everything you think you know about money. We're diving into Morgan Housel's fantastic book, The Psychology of Money. And the core idea? It's a total game changer. Getting good with money has way less to do with how smart you are and everything to do with how you behave.
This quote just nails the book's main point. We usually think about finance like it's a math-based field, like physics, with all these fixed rules and formulas. But here's the thing, it's not. It's actually a soft skill, and it's driven by our emotions and our psychology. And what that means is that a totally ordinary person with zero financial training can actually become wealthy, while a certified genius can end up with absolutely nothing.
To really see this in action, let's look at the story of two men. On one hand, you've got Ronald Reed, a janitor and gas station attendant from rural Vermont. And on the other, you have Richard Fuscone, a Harvard-educated Merrill Lynch executive with a fancy MBA. You think you know how this story is going to end, right?
Well, get this. When Ronald Reed, the janitor, passed away back in 2014, he left behind a fortune of over $8 million. The people who knew him were completely stunned. He just lived a simple life. He saved what he could, and he patiently invested his money in blue-chip stocks. That's it. That was the whole strategy.
And then you have the complete opposite, Richard Fuscone, the guy with every possible advantage, borrowed huge amounts of money to expand his already lavish lifestyle. He built a house so big it had 2 swimming pools and an elevator. So when the 2008 financial crisis hit, all that leverage completely wiped him out. He had to declare bankruptcy.
So this is the really big question. How on earth does this happen? How does a janitor become a multi-millionaire philanthropist while a top-tier finance executive goes totally broke? Let's unpack the psychology behind it.
Seriously, think about it for a second. Would you ever hear a story about a janitor performing a heart transplant better than a Harvard-trained surgeon, or designing a safer bridge than an engineer? No way, of course not. Those are hard sciences. But when it comes to investing, the amateur can and often does outperform the expert. So why is money so different?
And that right there is the core idea of the whole book. Money isn't governed by these rigid laws of physics. It's governed by human psychology. It's all about your behavior, your patience, your humility, your ability to think long-term. Those are the soft skills that beat raw intelligence every single time.
Okay, so this leads us to our first huge concept, understanding that when it comes to money, no one is crazy. The financial decisions we make, no matter how weird they might look to someone else, make perfect sense to us because they're based on our own unique life experiences. This idea is so powerful. We've all experienced just a tiny, tiny sliver of economic history, but that little sliver forms the absolute bedrock of our financial worldview. What we think of as common sense is really just a reflection of our own, very limited, personal past. So, for example, if you grew up in the 80s and 90s, you spent your teenage and young adult years watching the stock market go up nearly 10 times over. For you, stocks probably look like this incredible wealth creation machine. That's the lesson your life taught you. But look at this. If you were born just 1 decade earlier, your formative years were all about runaway inflation that just destroyed people's savings. You might see the world totally differently. Maybe you think debt is a terrible trap and that cash under the mattress is the only safe bet. And you know what? Neither of you is crazy.
So that person buying lottery tickets instead of putting money in a savings account might seem irrational to you, but to them, they're paying for a tangible dream in a world where other dreams feel completely out of reach. See, we're not irrational. We're all just operating from a script that our own life has written for us.
All right, let's move on to another huge psychological force, a pair of inseparable siblings that guide so much of what happens to us financially, luck and risk. Everybody knows Bill Gates is a genius, right? But he also had an unbelievable stroke of pure luck. Back in 1968, he went to Lakeside School, which was one of the only high schools on the entire planet that had a computer. That gave him a massive, massive head start.
Just how lucky was that? Well, the odds of a high school kid in 1968 attending a school with a computer like that one were literally 1 in a million. Gates himself has said without Lakeside, there would be no Microsoft. That's the power of luck.
But here's the thing. At Lakeside, Gates wasn't alone. He had a best friend, Kent Evans. And by all accounts, Kent was just as smart, just as skilled with computers, and he shared the exact same dream of running a major company one day. They were going to do it together.
And this is where risk, luck's identical twin, enters the picture. Kent Evans died in a tragic mountaineering accident before he even graduated. The odds of something like that happening were also about 1 in a million.
The same force, the same magnitude, just working in opposite directions.
So what's the big lesson here? It's that success is never just about hard work, and failure is never just about being lazy. Luck and risk are always at play. So when you're winning, remember you're not invincible. And when you're failing, it doesn't mean you made a horrible mistake. You might just be on the receiving end of risk.
Realizing how powerful luck is forces us to focus on the things we can control. And maybe the hardest thing to control isn't our investment strategy, but our own appetite. This brings us to our final, and maybe the toughest lesson of all, the art of knowing when you have enough.
This quote comes from a story about the author Joseph Heller. He's at a party, and someone points out that a hedge fund manager in the room made more money in a single day than Heller's masterpiece Catch-22 earned in its entire history. And that was his reply. Enough. It's such a simple idea, but it's incredibly powerful.
So how do we actually get that sense of enough? Well, the most dangerous psychological trap is social comparison, always measuring our own well-being against what other people have. It's a battle you can never, ever win because there's always someone with more. It's like a happiness treadmill. You get more, but your expectations just rise right along with it, so you're never any happier. Think about guys like Rajat Gupta or Bernie Madoff. They were already unbelievably wealthy, but they risked everything, their reputation, their freedom, just for more. It wasn't about needing the money, it was about the moving goalpost of comparison. They had no sense of enough.
And this brings us right back to where we started. Ronald Reed, the janitor, he understood enough. Richard Fuscone, the executive, did not. Financial success isn't about the size of your brain. It's about your ability to control your greed, to understand your own biases, and to recognize the incredible roles that luck and risk play in all of our lives. So, we'll leave you with this question. Your behavior is going to dictate your financial future far more than any spreadsheet or fancy degree ever will. It really all comes down to the stories we tell ourselves about what money is for, what we truly need, and when we finally have enough. So take a second and think about it. What's your story?